Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. As the sun set over the quiet neighborhood, tensions brewed between Karen, my entitled neighbor, and myself. Her audacity to repeatedly park her car in my driveway had reached its boiling point. Determined to reclaim what was rightfully mine, I devised a plan to outwit her. Little did I know this confrontation would escalate into a dangerous game of survival. With my husband away at work, I seized the opportunity to take action. Instead of confronting Karen directly, I decided to block my driveway with cement blocks whenever our car wasn't parked there. I hoped this would dissuade her from her selfish parking habits. Unfortunately, it only fueled her fury. One fateful day, I spotted Karen maneuvering her car, deliberately parking it in the middle of my front yard. Consumed by indignation, I rushed outside, my anger boiling over. Before she could step out of her vehicle, I confronted her, my voice laden with frustration. "Get your car off of my yard now!" I demanded, my words echoing through the tense air. Karen, unyielding in her entitlement, retorted, "This is what you get from blocking me from the driveway. You should let me park there." Infuriated, I responded, "The driveway belongs to me and my husband, not you." Defiantly, Karen proclaimed, "There is no way I am parking my car in the street when I can use your driveway. If you want to make things difficult, I will leave my car here." Frustration turned into resolve as I issued my final warning. "This is your last chance. If I see your car on my property again, I am calling to have it towed away. I refuse to play this game with you any longer." Enraged by my ultimatum, Karen started her car, appearing to acquiesce. However, as she reversed, she suddenly shifted gears, accelerating towards me. Instinctively, I leaped out of harm's way as her vehicle narrowly missed me. Shocked and trembling, I realized the extent of Karen's unhinged nature. She was willing to go to great lengths, even attempting to take my life, to assert her entitlement. Shaken, I immediately dialed my husband at work, his reassuring voice urging me to remain inside while he rushed home. In the brief period between Karen's vicious attack and my husband's arrival, she left a note by our door, a chilling reminder of her malevolence. The message threatened further harm if I dared to challenge her again. Fear gripped my heart, but as the next day dawned, I witnessed the audacity of Karen's actions. The cement blocks that once guarded my driveway had vanished, replaced by her car arrogantly occupying the space. Enough was enough. Determined to reclaim my peace, I made the difficult decision to have her car towed. An hour later, Karen arrived at my doorstep, accompanied by the police. She spewed false accusations, claiming she had rented the spot and that I had illegally towed her car. Desperate to defend my position, I pleaded with the officers to hear my side away from her vitriolic presence. Exhibiting the evidence, including the threatening note and the damaged grass from her attempt to run me over, I painted a clear picture of her escalating hostility. The police, recognizing Karen's baseless claims, arrested her to restore order and defuse the situation. Despite her relentless protests, justice prevailed. I felt a flicker of relief, knowing that the authorities understood the truth and sided with me. In the days that followed, Karen begrudgingly retrieved her car but found herself parking it on the street, defeated in her attempts to seize my driveway. News of her behavior spread, and even other neighbors refused to tolerate her audacious antics. Still, Karen persisted in defaming my character, attempting to tarnish my reputation at every turn. However, I chose to rise above her slander, knowing that those who believed her baseless lies were not worth my time nor my energy. Undoubtedly, Karen suffered a financial blow from retrieving her car, but she continued to blame me for her misfortune, hurling insults and claims of personal responsibility. I refused to engage her in further conflict, recognizing that her perception of reality would never align with mine. From that day forward, I remained vigilant, keeping a watchful eye on my driveway. If Karen ever dared to encroach upon my property again, I would swiftly summon the tow truck, ensuring she learned her lesson once and for all. No longer would I cower in the face of her entitlement. Instead, I would assert my rights and protect the tranquility of my home, standing strong against Karen's ceaseless attempts to disrupt my life. The next one is a pro-revenge story. I used to do construction work a few years ago and had the coolest manager ever, Thomas. Thomas had this next-door neighbor, Alan, who he couldn't stand. Alan would steal stuff from Thomas's yard, like gardening tools, lumber, and most importantly, dirt. Both Thomas and Alan had been growing vegetables in their backyards for years, and apparently, Alan had been stealing dirt from Thomas for years. Thomas, being a very non-confrontational guy, let it slide. One day at one of the job sites, they delivered a large amount of soil. You could climb those piles of soil. Thomas figured they wouldn't miss a few bucketfuls of dirt, and the general contractor on site didn't care either. So we started helping Thomas load up some buckets in the back of the truck. We loaded 8 buckets, and then he said to me, "Hold on, I need one more for Alan." I thought it was really nice of him to think about his neighbor. However, he was actually planning to leave the bucket out for Alan to steal instead of taking the dirt from his garden. That's when he told me about Alan and his thieving ways. Jokingly, I said, "You should take that tub of plant killer, I don't know what this stuff is called, you have and pour it over the fence. Screw him in his garden." Unbeknownst to me, the wheels of justice started turning in Thomas's head. He didn't say anything to me, and we finished up the day and went home. About a week later, I showed up at Thomas's house for work. He runs the business from home, and he was grinning to himself the whole morning. Eventually, my curiosity got the better of me, and I had to know what was going on, so I asked him. He broke down his revenge plan step by step. He got home and unloaded his buckets of dirt in his driveway where Alan could see them. Then he proceeded to dump all of them, one by one where he needed them, but he intentionally forgot one bucket. This particular bucket was laced with plant killer. He emptied the entire bottle into the bucket and mixed it in. The best part is that Thomas didn't offer Alan the laced bucket, he just left it out. If Alan had asked for dirt, Thomas would have given him the regular stuff, but instead he chose to be sneaky. Under the cover of darkness, Thomas ran over, grabbed the bucket and took almost all of it, then put it back. After a week, Alan's tomatoes withered and died. So Thomas went to the nursery and bought new plants, but they didn't last more than 2 days before dying. He went back to the nursery, complained, and got more plants for free. A few days later, bam, they were dead again. Every morning, we checked on Alan and his radioactive dirt and quietly laughed to ourselves about what we now called Operation Scorched Earth. The next one is an entitled people story. Several years ago, my brother Dan moved from California to Washington State and built a 3-bedroom house on one of 2 parcels of land he had bought when he was 18 years old. He lived in a nice community with a small lake and had a homeowners association. During the 2008 economic crash, he ran into financial trouble, so we helped him. To repay us for the help, in March of 2016, he came down to California for an extended period to work on our house, which was neglected because of helping him. He was very proficient at renovating houses and did fantastic work. In November, my brother's friend Jake called him and asked if a friend of his, Tuna, could stay in one of the rooms for $400 per month. Dan had worked for many years with Jake doing construction for a house flipper, so he trusted Jake's judgment, needed the money, and thought it might be good to have someone trustworthy there to watch his house. Dan drove back up to Washington, cleaned out a room, put a lock on his bedroom door, locked the door, and put some of his things in a storage area up out of the way in the garage. Tuna seemed nice and gave Dan $400 for the first month. There was never a written rental agreement. It was just verbal and meant to be temporary because Dan was going to return in 6 months. Tuna never sent another payment. We would call and ask her, and she always said it had been sent, but nothing ever arrived. So what was going on at his house? We pieced together that something wrong was going on there after Dan's neighbor called and after questioning Jake. The neighbor complained that the house had turned into a drug house, full of people and cars coming and going all hours of the night. At the beginning of June 2017, Dan drove back to Washington and handed Tuna a 3-day eviction notice. She left, stating that she had somewhere else to live and would get her stuff later. He was allowing her to retrieve her stuff at a later date. He just wanted her out. He started working on repairs and cleaning up the house. I mailed Dan a care package with some clothes, a California-themed shopping bag, and gift cards for gas and food. 5 days later, Tuna showed up with 2 men who punched Dan in the face. They wanted to take the house back by force. Dan went to the neighbor and called the police. The police came, and instead of arresting the men and Tuna, they took Dan to jail for missing a child support court date, which then put a warrant on him. Before coming to California, he thought everything regarding child support back payments for his independent, successful 23-year-old adult child had been taken care of. He had no idea about a court date since they notify by mail, and Tuna had never forwarded his mail, which was one of the things she promised to do. The child support scam on Dan is another issue I will have to submit later. So the police essentially handed the house over to Tuna. She and her cronies went in, changed the locks, and placed a long metal bar across the inside of the garage door so it could not be opened from the outside. They stole the package I sent to Dan and spent the gift cards. Meanwhile, my family and I were on vacation in Hawaii, and I received a phone call from Dan in jail. I spent a whole day of my vacation in the hotel room trying to figure out how to get him out of jail. Bail bonds could not be used for child support cases. Finally, they let him out when I paid a child support payment of $350. He had been in jail for 3 days, and the squatters had dug themselves in, so when he returned to his house, he had to call the police to arrest them for trespassing. After all, Tuna had been evicted, left, and no longer had permission to be there. They were squatters by all accounts, but the state defers to people who just claim they are renting, therefore requiring a landlord to go through the court system to remove the so-called tenants, who are actually squatters. The police came and screwed him over once again. Tuna claimed she was renting the entire house, and the police believed her instead of Dan. She told the policeman that she would leave in 10 days, and the policeman told Dan that he could have his house back in 10 days because Tuna said she would leave by then. Are you kidding me? Dan was instructed to leave the premises or be arrested. It was his house. She was trespassing. He got into his minivan and drove away with nowhere to stay but in his van. Of course, Tuna did not leave after 10 days. Dan went back after 10 days and called the police again. Once again, the police told him to leave or be arrested. We didn't know what to do next. One of the Homeowners Association board members, who had some experience in managing real estate properties, attempted to help us. She said that he needed a 20-day eviction notice, then Tuna would be out, and this had always worked for her when she had to evict tenants. Okay, so the 20-day notice was posted, and we waited. Tuna did not leave. Dan went over to his house and started cleaning up trash strewn all over the yard, waiting for her to leave. Tuna called the police, stating that she was a renter and he was disturbing her. Once again, Dan was asked to leave or be arrested. This time, Dan put his phone on speaker and I heard the whole interaction between him and the police. Yes, he had to leave or be arrested. Dan could not even get his construction tools out of the garage and could not work without his tools. And with being homeless, how do you even work? What was going to happen to all of his possessions, his sentimental things? His room had been broken into long before, his things removed, and people had used the room. It was near the end of summer. We were paying his mortgage payments, and it was getting so hard on everyone. Then something nice happened. A kind friend, Adam, asked him to stay at his house, which Dan did. During this time, Dan worked for Adam with loaned tools, and also went to some landlord-tenant educational meetings. The people at the meetings were helpful, and instructed Dan on how to proceed by taking the matter to court. The police would not go further without a court order to physically evict Tuna. It would be difficult to afford the cost to hire a lawyer, but eventually we did end up getting a lawyer. Dan posted a court appearance on the door of his house since Tuna never answered the door, and that is what you do legally in this case. Every time he posted a court appearance, he had to legally give her 1 week's notice, which he did. He showed up at court and Tuna failed to show up. So he won by default, right? Wrong. The judge said that Tuna was not given proper notice because the notice was posted by Dan instead of an anonymous person. Dan walked out of the courtroom. The lawyers from the landlord-tenant meetings were there and couldn't believe it. Unfortunately, Adam had to move out of the house he was renting, so Dan had to go back to living in his van. It was autumn in the Pacific Northwest, and it was getting cold. The police had started harassing him if he slept in his van. We rented motel rooms for Dan. Once while at a motel, Dan heard a knock on the door in the middle of the night. He thought it was the motel staff and opened the door. 2 men burst into the room and proceeded to beat the crap out of him to rob him. They broke his finger and gave him a concussion. Dan ran to his van, drove it to a parking lot, and slept. He refused to go back to the motel. Things were starting to go downhill in a very bad way. I found a lawyer from a non-profit who worked for free to help. He actually used that 3-day eviction notice that Dan had given Tuna back in June as a basis for the case. I had found it online, the wording was appropriate, and it had been served properly. The lawyer had to jump through endless hoops and court appearances. The same judge presided over every case that had to do with evictions, and she always favored the tenants, including entitled ones. This took forever, like 3 more months, and Dan became haggard, homeless, sick, depressed, and at times had gone missing. Once I called every hospital, jail, homeless shelter, and even the food bank looking for him. His van was impounded 4 times. He was hospitalized 4 times. He was endlessly hunted down and harassed by the police. 3 times I found him because I was listed as his emergency contact on his state insurance when he showed up at hospitals. While all of this was happening to Dan, my husband was in a serious motorcycle accident, and I had to take care of my husband, changing his dressings, etc. Okay, I'm crying right now. This was so hard to endure, remember, and difficult to write about. I couldn't leave and fly up to Washington to help my brother, but I was doing everything down here to get his house back with the lawyer. I got him motel rooms at other motels when I could. I paid 4 times to get his van out of impound. I sent him cell phones and care packages delivered at UPS stores. One time, Dan was lost and didn't have his van or phone. He ended up at a hospital that contacted me. He told me that he had felt really sick and had gone to the hospital earlier, who released him after examining him, even after he pleaded with them to let him stay because he felt horribly sick. He ended up collapsed on the sidewalk by the Salvation Army shelter, who wouldn't let him in, and another homeless person called 911. So he was back at that hospital with a very serious condition affecting his heart. I told the hospital to please call me at release time so I could arrange a motel for Dan. They didn't. He was then found in a park in frigid weather dressed in a pair of scrubs, a t-shirt, hoodie, and 1 shoe. A city policeman called me and took him to a motel where he stayed a while. I sent a care package there. Dan told me that one time when he was being harassed by the police for cooking food in a park, he mouthed off and told them they were communists, and it was their fault that he was homeless because they gave his house to a squatter. A fire truck arrived, so he was not arrested with the firemen there, but I don't think the police liked him much for saying that. In October, Dan was arrested for drunk driving while he was sleeping in a Walmart parking lot. I had to bail him out of jail over that. Every time he didn't get to court hearings, they would post warrants for his arrest. One time he was in jail, and they refused to give him his medication, so I had to bail him out because he felt so awful. In mid-November, the police arrested Dan again for not showing up to court for that so-called drunk driving incident. He begged me to bail him out. Even though the bail bondsman paid the bail in the late afternoon, the jail released him in the middle of the night, again with no vehicle impounded, a dead cell phone, no charger in the van, no money, etc. I found out later that this jail only releases people at night so they can get credit and are paid by the state for the whole day. That night he was released, it was our deceased mother's birthday. Dan was then found unconscious in a ditch by a seawall in a Starbucks parking lot. He had a broken femur, broken hip, cracked spine, a head contusion, and that finger was still broken, from the motel incident. The doctors evaluated that he had been hit in the back of his head with a blunt object. We do not know who did it. The last thing he remembers was a police car driving by. He was airlifted to a major hospital in Seattle, about 50 miles from where he was. I took a flight up to Seattle as soon as I could and visited him. The doctors showed me the x-rays, and he had countless rods and pins put into his body to put him back together. By this time, we were getting closer to having his house back. I went by the house with Adam's brother-in-law, Paul, who was packing heat. We pounded on the door, and I demanded that the squatters hand over my dead mother's rocking chair. The stupid friend Jake was there, and he handed it through the door. It is a big heirloom mission-style chair, and they had burned into the chair in 4-inch letters the word wasted. The court order finally became available, but then we had to schedule the eviction according to when the police had time to do it, which was another 2 weeks. It was scheduled for the beginning of December. I went back home to California briefly and returned the night of the eviction. Dan was in the hospital for almost 2 weeks. When he was released, I arranged a nice long-term stay-type hotel back near home for him to live at until the police evicted the squatters. Paul helped us a lot. He was with the police at the eviction, changed all the locks, and secured the house. He picked up Dan at the hotel, and Dan got to witness the eviction of that entitled idiot from hell. She was the only one left in the house. A notice had been posted on the door to warn everyone to leave, but as usual, she didn't think there would be any reason she would have to leave. It took her completely by surprise. The police pounded on the door and demanded she leave immediately. She asked if she could get this and that, but no, she couldn't. She grabbed her little dog purse and left with nothing else. The police put a notice on the door after Paul secured everything. Dan was driven back to the hotel, and then I arrived. I wish I could have seen the eviction, but couldn't get a flight early enough. The neighbor said that a bunch of people came to the house that night pounding on the door trying to get in, but couldn't. They almost called the police, but the people left. We went over there every day for about a week to clean up. Dan was confined to a wheelchair and was on heavy meds, so it was hard. He couldn't help too much, but did his best. The house was a disaster. There were literally 5 tons of garbage in the yards around the house. The trash disposal service was not activated during this time, so they just piled it up around the house. On one side of the house was a huge pillar of trash made out of wire fencing. It was about 8 feet by 8 feet and at least 12 feet high. The front yard was awful, with several piles of trash about 4 feet high. Tuna left every single thing in the kitchen, in the cupboards, and rotting food in pans. The carpets were soaked in dog pee. There were clothes and junk everywhere. There was loads of crushed glass embedded into the gravel driveway like she wanted us to get flat tires. Over the doorway from the house into the garage was a dangerous booby trap, which literally could have killed someone. It was made out of large, heavy metal clamps with a glass jewelry case teetering on top of the clamps. It could have fallen on top of someone's head if not discovered, and someone jarred it a little. The water had been shut off for months by the homeowners association, because they controlled the well and owned the water system. As soon as you don't pay the homeowners association fees, water is shut off. All the toilets were clogged up with crap. The sewage system was impossible to unclog, and later DB discovered that they had thrown dirt and plastic containers down the pipes. He had to go under the house and disassemble the pipes to get everything out. Hanging up on the wall in plain sight in the master bedroom was the California shopping bag I had mailed to Dan in the package that Tuna had stolen. She hung it there to taunt me. I am not super religious, but I felt the worst kind of evil there and had to pray and debunk the evil spirits from that house. I stayed for weeks there cleaning up and hired some people to do yard cleanup to get the front yard clean. Later, Dan and Adam dealt with the pillar of trash at the side of the house. Every construction tool that belonged to Dan was stolen. He couldn't work much from a wheelchair but needed the tools to repair his own house. Dan persisted, though. He finally got to the point where he could walk. Now he can't walk for long periods, gets tired easily, but can do things slowly. He has some nice roommates that drive him places and take care of him at times. Many of his tools have been replaced. He sanded off the wasted message on Mom's rocking chair. We have sunk a lot of money into helping him, but what else is one supposed to do? It was a life or death situation. That was his house he had built so many years ago. This was the most wicked thing I have ever encountered. It was coming from all directions. We heard that the creepy squatter died a year later. No one wanted to take her in, and she went from person to person staying wherever. If she would have been decent and kind, she probably could have been a roommate and had a place. But she thought she could just take someone's house. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn, Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I immediately followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here." "He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. but carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.